I wanted to begin with a bigger picture question. What are your thoughts about the value of music and the arts during this period of socio-political strife?
Um, Actually, I had when I was in conversation with Chris Frantz really early on, talking about the book, and he asked something like this, and I think that if we people of a progressive politics and mindset fight battles using the language of our opponents or people of the other side, then you're almost doomed to fail. You know, if the conversations are about, for example, in this country, there are too many people coming in on boats. I mean, you know, it probably is true. There are too many people coming in on boats, but actually, it's an irrelevant thing in the big picture. The big picture is the population is declining, and actually, we need immigrants. But if you don't change the territory of the conversation, you're going to lose. You're going to lose the argument. And I think that it's that we will be saved by culture. I think I read only about 40 minutes ago that South Park, which is on Paramount, has done an episode which sounds really, really funny, where they have Trump, having conversations with Satan every day. I mean, it's really brilliantly South Park-like, and it is funny, but it has a serious point to it. And I know that when I was involved in very much with Rock Against Racism in the 1970s and 80s, that was a response to, actually it was Eric Clapton who'd very vocally shouted out support for a hard right racist politician, and the overwhelming majority of British musicians got together and said, we're not going to allow this to stand, and what we're going to do is we're going to show that we love each other, of whatever our origins and our heritage, and the world's a better place for us loving each other's origins and heritage. And the result of that was that the hard right parties, who were on a roll, they didn't elect, and they never have ever elected, a single hard right politician in this country in the way that has happened very sadly in the United States. So I think that is something that is really important. I mean, I'm shocked really at the moment about how little music there is that says anything about the world right now. I mean, I'm shocked by it. Were I writing now, I don't know how I could have avoid writing about what's going on without being a journalist. I'm a musician. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a politician. But you write about the things that matter to you. Yeah.
Well, when you were performing during the Gang of Four farewell tour and other recent tours, of course, you had Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ flags, anti-fascist flags draped behind you. Did you feel a particular sense of renewed relevance for your music in this context?
I very strongly did on this last tour. I'm not a hugely sort of sociable person, and I was never in the habit of going out front in the past. After shows, I'm quite exhausted, and I would like to sit on my own. But I did this time, and I went out every night for about an hour or so to talk to people at the merch stand. Obviously, there was some self-interest in there, but it became very moving for me, and I was taken by it. I had people would come along and tell me their sometimes they're personal stories, very short. Obviously, there were quite a lot of people saying things. Many of them saying, "Thank you for doing this," and I was quite overwhelmed by it. I mean, because I hadn't really thought, it's a kind of, I hadn't really thought of the music as being some kind of public service, I suppose. But I was really taken by that and very moved by it. I mean, I was actually a couple of times in tears myself after doing it all. I found it all a bit much. Not much, but I was very moved by it, and I was also struck by how many young people were there. I mean, I'm officially an old person, but there were. It's hard to know, but generally the estimate was that around a third of the audience were Gen Zs under 25, and then certainly many of them would come up saying, why isn't they'd say things like, "Why isn't anyone else doing this?" I mean, they'd only just discovered the band somehow or other. I don't quite know how gangoffour is. Obviously, there's Spotify and there's YouTube and all these kind of channels, but it seems to have had resonance with Gen Z, and they noticed the flags. You mentioned them. We'd play and halfway through a song, the audience sometimes would cheer, break out into applause, and I'd think, hang on a minute, I'm in the middle of the verse. And I would turn around and I would see the sign that would say, "Stop bombing Gaza," or "Fight fascism." I mean, it was really interesting. And I was struck as well. It wasn't just in America. I mean, we played our last European dates in Paris, which is sort of quite often thought of as a very restrained place. The crowd was going nuts, and again, responding to the messaging. So yeah. I mean, I was really, really struck by it all. And when we played in Ireland, we did a couple of nights in Dublin, and the current singer, the Undertones, came along, and he said, wanted to say thanks because he said we're the only mainland band that actually were writing about what was going on in Northern Ireland. I don't know whether that's true or not, but they felt that. You had Stiff Little Fingers from Northern Ireland. You had the Undertones from Northern Ireland talking about that. It was civil war. There were bombs going off in London all the time as well. But I hadn't really thought how much I had written about Northern Ireland. I mean, when we played Entertainment track by track, the opening song is Ether, which is it was a pretty sort of, I mean, the record company didn't like us starting the album with that. But that song, which I wrote, the classic oppositional kind of way of writing, is trapped in heaven's lifestyle, locked in Long Kesh. And I hadn't really thought until after, this is only like 2 weeks ago, I hadn't really thought how much I'd written about Ireland. But in the context of this, false consciousness we have, we live these wonderful lives at the expense of misery somewhere else. We're all happy to have cheap T-shirts, but people are being paid like $5 a day to make these T-shirts. So, you have to decide: is it possible to buy a T-shirt for $5 without someone being put in misery? So, I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Oh, I think you did. Well, back in 2024, David Pajo said he was looking forward to further work with the band, and then he applied that there were discussions about new gangoffour music in the offing. I'm curious what led to his departure and sort of abandoning the new music inklings and then transforming into a farewell tour.
Well, David was, it was David's decision. I don't think he was not feeling very well, I think. I don't want to just, you know, but we are great friends. I mean, he and I are great friends. We spent time together writing on new material. What I didn't want to do was write a Gang of Four record. Just kind of unpack that. I was really pissed off when Andy made effectively 3 solo albums, which were called Gang of Four. And I don't think, unless you've got at least 2 of the 3 original founder members, it's a possible thing to do. And I didn't want to write another Gang of Four record. David and I still talk about writing together, but I think it would not it would not be a Gang of Four record. You know, were I to write, again, hypothetically, with Ted Leo, it would not be a Gang of Four record. It would be something else. That's really it. So I think yeah. Well, that's it really. But just. I mean, David was going to be sitting in with us in Los Angeles on the recent tour, just to show, you know, the great love that we all have for each other. He's doing amazing things with his guitars now, which is what he's really concentrating a lot on. Yeah.
And then how did we end up at the final end of this very storied institution?
Well, it's the end of touring. I mean, I don't want to tour anymore. I wanted to give Entertainment as an album a proper send-off. It was originally, we talked about doing something to mark the 45th anniversary of the album coming out. And you always wonder as a musician whether what you did was worthwhile or worth doing again. I mean, I've always been a great lover of blues music, and I remember going to see Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee, and they must have been in their 80s. So, well, at least they look like they're in their 80s, and you know, you can play for as long as you like your own material or anyone else's material, really. What else are you going to do? But touring is certainly the way that Gang of Four shows, and you've seen what we do. It's really, I didn't want to do a half-assed thing, and I was really pleased at the way that we could do an incredibly intense show, night after night after night after night. And every night I thought, wow, that was just incredible. And I'd be quite exhausted and think, we can't do that again. I was always waiting until it was all over. I was waiting for there to be an average show, and there never was. And so I didn't want to do that anymore. It's not to rule out, you know, performing in the future in some other format, or possibly, I mean, there might be a festival, but I don't want to tour anymore. I think I don't want to tour Gang of Four anymore. I think I'm done with that.
Well, what went through your mind after the final encore of the final show on July 5th at the Paradiso in Amsterdam?
Well, it was funny in the sense I didn't really feel anything transcendent. I mean, the Paradiso was, I think, our first ever show in Europe, I think, and it was our last ever show in Europe. And it's a wonderful place. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's you know, I love it there, and and the show had been really amazing. I am of that quite familiar school of gloomy musicians who always wonder what anyone will turn up. And I saw an interview that Ozzy Osbourne. I heard an interview with Ozzy Osbourne only a day or so ago after his sad death, and Ozzy says, you know, he's always be in the wings saying, "Oh, will anyone be there?" You know, and there'd be like, I remember it was they were playing in like 20,000 seat stadiums, and I always sort of wondered whether anyone will turn up. And of course, you know, Paradiso was sold out, but at the end of it, it was such a fabulous show. I thought, guys, this is such a great band. I mean, having Ted and Gail with us, and with me and Hugo, it was just such a tremendous thing. But I just felt, yeah, we've done it. You know, I mean, it's like using an art analogy, there was a famous painting by J.M.W. Turner, the great British artist, and he'd exhibited it at the National Galleries or the Royal Academy or something. And he hung this great big painting up, and he's very competitive. And Constable had a painting in there, which was one of his great artworks. That Turner turned up and saw that his picture was maybe not going to get the attention it deserved. He personally felt it deserved at the private view that Constable had. So he went home, came back in with a little pot of red paint, and he painted a bobbing barrel in the middle of the sea. It's tiny little blob of red, and it was like a magic trick. And I felt, yeah, that's it. This all sounds very pretentious, really, but one of my favorite pieces of classical music is by Bach, and there's a line in it. It's "Ich habe genug," it is enough. And I just thought, yeah, I think it is enough. Yeah.
All right, well, let's move on to your new book, To Hell with Poverty. And now the book covers essentially the beginning of the band through to the end of the hard period around 1983. I'm curious, what made you want to focus on that timeline as opposed to the story that continued for you between 87 and 2012 and in recent years?
Well, it was a natural break. I think had I carried on, the book would have been, you know, a massive doorstopper. You know, when I first got the assignment, I knew I had to write, or the target was to write 80,000 words, which seemed an unfeasibly large amount initially, and until I sort of worked out what I was doing, and there were definitely two sort of halves to the band. You know, up till 84 was a catastrophic meltdown. I mean, we were, you know, robbed. Everything that we had was stolen from me and Andy by the manager, every penny. And so I had nothing. So it had a dramatic arc to it, which was, I thought, quite a sort of, everything I felt about it was sort of blackly funny. I mean, in hindsight, thinking about what a crook Bennett Glotzer was, you know, almost if you were to make a movie of it, you know, he'd be the comic hero, anti-hero of it, I think, and he would have been brilliantly played by someone like Danny DeVito, you know. But after that, Andy, you know, we broke up. Remember, the manager had stolen all of our money. We'd gone out on tour to pay off, effectively to pay debts and put some money in our pockets. Andy had cancer of the testicle. He was really, which I mentioned in the book, he was really ill. I mean, in those last months, you know, when he was really ill, and we both thought, you know, he might die. And I said, let's just pack it in, you know, let's just go bust. And he said, no, I want to carry on. And I didn't want my friend to die for the band, but he really wanted to carry on. So the moment that tour finished, he went straight into Mount Sinai Hospital to have this very major surgery. It was just a point where everything was just sort of collapsing. Although, of course, as soon as while he was in hospital, I got the job for us both to write a song on the Karate Kid. So it started off a different thing, and then he and I then worked in a very random kind of way for the next 20 years, and I think it's a different kind of narrative. And the second half narrative would have been, you know, how you get on when really you sort of don't get on. And his alcoholism became worse and worse. And by the end of that period, we were not on speaking terms, and he was really ruined by drink by that point. And I didn't want to write anything that was unkind about him. I tried as much as possible to be as generous as I could up to 84. After that point, it would have been quite difficult. And in the context of us both doing other things, his primary activity was to work as a record producer. That's what he primarily wanted to do, and I primarily worked in production, you know, and that kind of thing. So we didn't see each other very much at all, except when we came together for the shrink wrapped album for Mall and things like that. And then we go away to our own lives. We didn't. You know, it was very, very different. Very different.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on those records a little bit later, but going back to your book, you know, Gang of Four's music has been, you know, mostly considered, you know, as very serious, profound stuff, and it's been addressed with academic rigor in several books, as of course you're aware. And my sense is you wanted to infuse the proceedings with a sense of levity, a view into the absurdity. What are your thoughts about reflecting the balance in your work?
Well, I think one of the things about the band, we have always been a really fierce live act. You know, we've always been a really fierce live act. And I know that people sometimes think that it's all of, I suppose it's a project that is architecture to support the words, which it isn't. It's not like, say, Patti Smith. I mean, Patti Smith's stuff is all about her words, you know, and or I don't know, like Leonard Cohen, you know, generally, you know. So I don't, although I wrote all the words, the band is a really fierce, loud funk rock band, I guess, guitar band, which reflects my and our collective love of, you know, funkadelic and Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin, and of course punk rock. I think that there's always been an anti-intellectualism, and certainly in Britain and in America, where sort of, if you have ideas about things, somehow that makes it sort of hard to understand, which I don't think is true at all. I don't think it's hard to understand I'll have a man in a uniform. I don't think it's very hard to understand, you know, at home he's a tourist. But going back to your question, you know, 15 minutes ago about, you know, can things be changed by culture and art? Well, actually, if you keep on singing songs, if musicians keep writing songs about club life and getting laid and getting wasted, or variants of that, then sure, you know, we will slump into fascism without a whimper. Without a whimper. But I say that again in the context of, you know, I'm not a politician, but you think of music, of someone like Bob Marley. You know, Bob Marley did a huge amount of good for, I think, how people might think about getting on with each other within a much more pop sort of context, pop reggae context. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned At Home He's a Tourist and I Love a Man in a Uniform. Of course, the BBC banned those, and you cover that in the book. One thing you did say about that is that it's a net positive when things get banned because it means power structures are being challenged. What bigger picture impact do you feel Gang of Four had in encouraging its audience to challenge power without fear?
Well, I all I know is that very many musicians have sort of taken stuff away from what we've done and encouraged them to do their own thing, you know, and that might be, you know, everyone from sort of Nirvana, who I thought were very progressive, to sort of Rage Against the Machine, or most recently, which I was really thrilled about, you know, was Run the Jewels. You know, the hip hop acts like them and Frank Ocean and were you know, the power of hip hop has been to sort of write about meaningful things. There's obviously there's a bragging side to hip hop, you know, we put that to one side, and there's a sort of consumerist side to it. But there is this side, like say Run the Jewels, trying to talk about what's going on. And you know, and I use that sort of advisedly because, you know, one of my great inspirations was What's Going On by Marvin Gaye. You can write stuff like that, which is great to dance to, and great to listen to, great to remember, but is, you know, really powerful. So, you know, I know authors and writers are sort of unreliable witnesses of their own work, but I do know what people have said to me about it. And of course, you know, I think it's by a quote from Douglas, you know, power doesn't do anything unless you make a demand, you know. Yeah.
Well, you have a short chapter on Velvet Underground in the book, and I'm sure you're familiar with the famous Brian Eno quote that goes, "The first Velvet Underground album only sold 10,000 copies, but everyone who bought it formed a band." Do you think a similar statement could be made about entertainment?
Well, that's what I'm told. Yeah, I think it's on that last tour. What was amazing was, you know, get everyone from you know, guitarists in the Black Crows to Michael Stipe and Peter Buck and Lenny Kaye and etc. coming up doing guest spots, you know, and they were all talking about why they wanted to do it because it meant something to them. You know, I was talking to St. Vincent's guitarist, you know, and he came up to me, and I almost sort of wonder why people talk to me at all, really. But he came up and he said, I just wanted to say how much I love what you did. And he would have liked to have done a turn, but they were playing a set at the same time at a festival. And I was really sort of flattered by that. Yeah, I mean, certainly we sold about as many records as Velvet Underground. So you won't see, but you know, I think it's always a problem about, you know, commerciality. You know, would it have been better if we had written more commercial music? I thought I'd actually written a commercial song with "I Love a Man in a Uniform." I mean, it sounded you don't start off trying to write a commercial song necessarily, but it did. Once it was in the can, I thought this sounds like it could be a hit, and everyone said it could be a hit until it was banned. And so I have to put my hands up because it's my fault, really, because it wasn't banned because of the tune, which I wrote, or the chords, which Andy wrote, or the beat, which Hugo and Dave wrote. It was or Hugo wrote rather. It was the words, which sort of shows it had relevance and power enough to be prohibited. But if we'd been chasing the money, entertainment would never have been made. I mean, it's not, it's an outsider record, really. I mean, it's not it's funny that it even exists, I think, sometimes.
Well, in the Gang of Four version 1.0 chapter, you talk about the genesis of the group's earliest songs. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate on the creative process amongst the four of you that yielded them.
We had we've been given a free of charge a room in a big old warehouse in Leeds. And we just had all the equipment set up in there. And what would typically happen is me and Dave and Hugo would turn up, and Dave and Hugo would sit around and, you know, just play stuff together. And, you know, I'd sing along a bit, and Andy would turn up. And after a while, it was trying to find a very, very simple riff or beat that you could sort of work around. I mentioned Tourist before, but Tourist was, we thought, oh, it'd be great to write a disco song, because we all liked Chic, and we liked you know, songs like Last Night a DJ Saved My Life and things like that. And but so Dave could play that stuff. So, you know, doon diddle doon diddle doon. Hugo played a 4 on the floor beat. And what was interesting there was Andy then could do really like Jimi Hendrix. You know, he just improvised around it. Not just say, let me eliminate the word just. He improvised around it, which was just so inspirational. And then I did my thing on top of it. So it was very layered. I can't think of any situation when we like, say, Lennon McCartney, John Lennon or Paul McCartney, I'm thinking of the two wonderful writers, would write a song. You know, they'd come in and he'd go, yesterday, da 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 da. And John didn't sometimes even turn up to record the thing, of course, or the other way around. So they'd have a completed song written by an individual, or typically a songwriting duo. Like Bacharach David would sort of knock out a hit or something, or Doja Holland actually would knock out something. So that never happened. And that was really a function of the way that Andy and I worked, because Andy didn't do any work outside the studio whatsoever. I mean, he didn't even have a guitar in his flat. So he would turn up, and and I think none of us really did that. I mean, I wrote lyrics, and I still do write lyrics all the time in a note format. But then they become, you know, this great sort of, you know, like a lottery bag or something. You put your hand in, you pull out a sentence or a line, and it then sort of has its own dynamic. So that was really the way it worked. And I felt that when once you realised what the logic of the song was, you just had to follow its scent. So say Ether, once I'd written a note, sort of something about how everything, I'm just paraphrasing what I said earlier on, how everything that we have is often at the price of someone else's misfortune. You know, I'm talking about us in the prosperous countries. And so as soon as you go locked in heaven lifestyle, locked in Longkesh, then the motif becomes, there's this thing about Northern Ireland, because the British government had been found guilty of torture. As I mentioned in the book, the British Army followed, you know, sensory deprivation and noise and standing up and all this kind of stuff, which were then perfected by the Americans at Abu Ghraib for their so-called Super 8 torture. And it had its own logic to it. And it was like years later, I, like the entire world, loved watching Breaking Bad, because what that the writers did there, they started off with an idea, which actually I think it was a dramedy. I think it was just trying to get a gig for the talent, and then and the proposition this chemistry teacher in America where he's not got much, he's fatally ill, and there's a terrible healthcare system. Of course, you couldn't make that program in Europe because he would just go to hospital and he'd be fine. But there, as soon as you go on the logic of it, he starts manufacturing this terrible drug. Then you start thinking, well, what would actually happen if you did this? How would you sell it? Who would you sell it to? Would you know, that kind of thing? And you end up several series like he's like the devil. He is the devil, and it's like that in songs. You have to take your character or the situation and it becomes its thing. Yeah.
All right. Well, I did want to cover some of the other albums, perhaps briefly, but you mentioned the issues with Andy around the time of the Mall and Shrink Wrapped albums. But what about the music itself? How do you look back at those records from the 90s and what was captured on them?
Well, at the time, I like the only song that we perform is I Parade Myself now. And what I felt that with all of them that I missed was Andy and I did it in Andy's studio. And I don't really like working using samplers and things like those things. I like actually being with other musicians and working off musicians. And Andy didn't like that. And it became, I missed having a real drummer. And that was the persistent musical difference between us was, I wanted to play it with a band to make the things or write the songs and then take the band into studio and then record them. And Andy didn't want to do that because he liked, as he said about himself, I'm not going to be snarky about him. He said, I'm a control freak. That's what he said about the way he worked. And that was why, of course, his album with Red Hot Chili Peppers went south, because they wanted to be like a band. He wanted them to be, playing to drum machines. And what I missed about that was the fluidity and the grit in playing with other people. I mean, like everyone else in the world, I'm a huge fan of Brian Wilson's work, and I listen very often to the greatest love song ever written, God Only Knows, and you listen to it and you think it's from another era. To me it's like Beethoven, but not just to me, but it's like a trick. You think, how can you write a song that goes along like this with no real, it's got a repetitive line but no real chorus to it, and then it does a key signature and a time signature change, and then it got sort of sparks up into a different key, and then there's a sort of improvised run out. And I don't think that sort of thing it happens when you're using GarageBand and stuff. And I think the terrible, creative corruption of the digital technology, which I use. I mean, I use Logic Pro. I'm not talking about this from a Logic perspective, but as soon as you're sitting there thinking, oh, I need to have an idea, I need a beat, and it says, what kind of beat do you want? Do you want a bossa nova beat? What time do you want it to be? And do you want a bass line? Everything sounds acceptable, but who wants to make acceptable music? Everything sounds nice, and the palette becomes really anonymous if you surrender to that stuff. So I felt in a proto kind of way about our own work was the sensation I felt after each one that I made was they were potentially really great songs, but they sounded quite sterile to me at the end of it. Like Hard, I hated Hard. I loathed it. I mean, and we had booked the drummer of Miami Sound Machine. He came in and laid down the tracks, and then it was all replaced with a drum machine. And it was, and that wasn't the deal that I had signed up to. So so that was the thing. And I can't say more that I went along with all of this for a long time, and I don't think any of them are great records.
Does that hold for the 2011 Content album as well? Because I do feel that's a very, very strong record.
Which one is that? Yeah, that's different, that one, I think, because Content was, we did work really hard to try and make that a good record, but it was very I found it very difficult to do. I mean, to make it. What had happened by that point was my songwriting role was to write all the melody lines and all the vocal parts and all the lyrics, and then I did everything else. And I still think, although I really like that record and there's some really strong ideas on it, I think it would have been better if we'd actually played it as a band. I think it would have been better if we'd had a bass player and a drummer in the room and we worked those songs to take them to a different place. And I think of how Reeves, I Parade Myself, which actually was a song I wrote, but how much better it is live than it is on the recording. It's just immense. It's like a metal song, and really and sort of built on a vamp, but it's grit. I mean, that's the thing. I think that's my feeling. I feel a general sense of it's they're like 90% records, So I feel it's quite complicated, really. But when we were working, it was I'd sit there and maybe sort of 2 days listening to a hi-hat pattern, and I'd eventually just go away, and it's a cycle. I don't mean to do this. It's just some people like working. I don't like working like that at all, and I'd rather not be in a room just hearing the same or chopping up a drum part to find the perfect take of a verse and then splice it everywhere else, because I think that's not the way Good Vibrations works, or or Marvin, or What's Going On, or for example anything that I think Nirvana did, or even Run the Jewels. I mean, I like the messiness of it all, even though they're easy machines all the time.
Well, 2011 and the Content album, after that cycle was done, that was the break for you, and you were gone until, of course, Andy's passing. Without focusing, I guess there's no way to approach this question without it going a little negative, but what were the sort of irreconcilable differences that were going on that meant you just were not going to work together again?
Well, his alcoholism. I mean, he'd be drinking 4 bottles of wine a night, 5 bottles of wine a night. That probably 1 in every 4 shows was disaster when we played. It was really difficult. I mean, I think anyone who's worked with someone who's got substance abuse and alcohol addiction problems knows how difficult it is. And I wanted us to stop. And one of the things that I was, I didn't quit the band. I said, the band is you and me. It's got to be 2 of us. And we were not on speaking terms. I mean, it was so toxic and so difficult. It's not unknown, of course, for guitarists and singers to not really get on with each other. And I mean, again, we've got the sad death of Ozzy this week, but I mean, Ozzy was sacked by Black Sabbath for this kind of thing back in the day. A wonderful man. I'm not saying to criticize him, but these things do cause terrible difficulties. I mean, and you know, you know what it's like when you're working with someone, and if you've got to be in the same room and they're just, you know, not you know, all of those physical and psychological behaviors that go along with that are not nice. So I wanted us to pack it in, and we had a very difficult time, and he said, no, I'm going to carry on. Because of the two of us, you can't, if someone wants to do something and the other one doesn't, then they carry on. I said, well, Oasis wouldn't have carried on with just Liam. He went off and formed BDI, didn't he? And the High Flying Birds Flying Knoll. They didn't go on, and the Smiths stopped when Morrissey and he split up. So I said, carry on, you know, whatever, but don't call it Gang of Four. That's why, you know, going back to your earlier question, was I going to write another Gang of Four record? No, I wasn't, because I thought it was wrong to make solo records and call them Gang of Four, because of course Andy couldn't write lyrics to save his life. Any more than I can. I mean, I'm a very, very bad guitarist. But you will never hear me. You'll never hear me playing a guitar on a record. I'm a terrible guitarist, and so I think, you know, that's one where you stay in your lane. I mean, Andy was a wonderful guitarist, but you know, it was the Gang of Four project was a different thing altogether. Really, it was him and me, or him and me and Hugo, any two from three, really. But it had to be two of us.
All right, well, let's wrap up with a couple of positive questions.
Yeah.
And so I understand that going forward, you're working on your artwork, you're working on new solo music. Tell me about both of those realms you're pursuing and what we can expect.
Well, I always did I did the covers of Entertainment and Songs of the Free and Solid Gold and associated sort of singles covers. And what I had always wanted to be an artist. I didn't really want to be a musician. And I was, you know, really thrilled by the reaction to those things. I even now, or not even now, but particularly now, the cover of Entertainment has become a kind of an iconic thing, you know, by this very simple storytelling device, which obviously I ripped it off from the situationist idea, but the you know, these characters, you know, with the scarecrows, the cowboy scarecrows, the Indian scarecrows, and but a narrative around it, and that's had a great power to it. And I have my recent stuff, which I was actually had on the merch stand. I was selling these postcards, which I had these woodblock postcards with metal typeset things, which were describing a physical thing is a bit pointless. Or my coins piece, which was when there was a compilation album out called The Brief History of the 20th Century. That was something that I was very pleased about as an artwork, and that had two coins. One a French franc coin, which had its old national slogan, liberty, equality, fraternity, and then a coin from the time when the Vichy government in the Second World War were Nazi collaborationists, and they changed the national slogan to work, family, country. And we're seeing that shift, the great battle of ideas happening at the moment in the United States, of liberty, equality, fraternity, the great founding principles of the American Constitution, and work, family, country, by people who probably don't believe in any of those things. And so I think that, again, going back to what you said earlier, or what we were talking about earlier, was the power of culture to sort of describe that great battle. So that's what I'm working on. I was also finally, when I did the box set design for the for those 5 albums and the designing of that book, I again was very, I was delighted, obviously, to be nominated for a Grammy finally for that, and I think that, there's a great deal of room for visual art to do something that's more interesting. So, of course, I can't describe what I'm going to do before I'm doing it, or while I'm doing it. It's bad luck, but there's a lot of things I'm working on in that territory.
What about the music part?
In the music, I'm at the moment, what I want to do, whether I'll succeed or not, is to do something which is about how we live now, or what we're enduring now. I think it is interesting, as I said earlier, the absence of things about what life is like now. In the 1960s, when I was only little, it didn't really affect me. But I think even someone like Kenny Rogers would write a song like "Ruby, Don't Take Your Love to Town" about a disabled Vietnam War vet who can't get it up anymore, and his wife's going out to get laid and have fun. I think that would probably be banned now. A song by someone like Kenny Rogers would not be possible. And I can't imagine an act. I can't imagine Taylor Swift writing a song like "Ruby, Don't Take Your Love to Town," which was a wonderful song in a country and Western tradition about a real thing. Or the Supremes, writing about Love Child, or Marvin Gaye. And then, of course, in more recent times, when you see like Rage Against the Machine do their stuff, I find the absence of stuff now quite surprising, and I think that's why the Gen Z lot have sort of discovered entertainment. I think maybe it's just I'm in an echo chamber, and I'm not aware of this music cutting through, but I may be talking shit.
So is the idea that eventually we'll have a Jon King solo album?
Possibly, or not necessarily called Jon King, but called something. I think if I was working with Paco, it would be a collaboration, and it wouldn't be a solo album like that. No, I think I would like to work. I intend to work with other people. I think that would make it much better.
All right, my very last question for you is, how would you describe the creative spirit and drive that inhabits and informs you at this point in your life?
Well, when I started off, all I wanted to do was change the world, and I'm now, in the twilight of my existence, and I still think the world needs to be changed. I think that the creative urge is to make a difference. I don't, you want to make ripples in the pond of life somehow or other, the pond of culture, and to be thrilling and exciting and fun. It's not this. You don't want to be a wagging finger bore. You want to be about fun and thrills, but about changing the world. I mean, the world right now needs a lot of changing. It is changing. It's not changing in the way that I would applaud. So you either sort of suck it up and say, oh, well, let's just wait and see. or you do something, you can't sit on your hands. That is not an option. Sitting on your hands is not an option. And we see when we do sit on our hands, what happens everywhere. I mean, I don't want to particularly talk about Gaza, but you see what's going on there. That's the result of us sitting on our hands and seeing this terrible nightmare. So, yeah.
All right. Well, listen, thank you for being so generous with your time. This was
Yeah.
a great conversation.
Oh, thank you.